Hello and welcome to today's community webinar. So today I'm really excited because we're joined by Totora's Chief Learning Officer, Lars Hyland, and our guest speaker today, so author and HR Director for Talent and Learning at Deloitte UK, Nick Shackleton-Jones, who's not in Paris. Okay, so during the webinar today, you're all very welcome to ask any questions. So you can do that as you are doing in the chat there. You can also do that in the Q&A function. And if we get lots of questions during the presentation today, we'll take some pauses and we'll read those questions out so that you can make sure your voice is heard during the webinar. But we're also recording today's webinar, and that's available on the Totora community. So if you're not already a member of the Totora community, do go and create a free account there. If you have any follow-up questions to the webinar after this event as well, if you're watching the recording, please do feel free to ask questions in the community as well, and we'll come back to you with answers there. So COVID-19 has seen a huge transformation in the way we work and learn, with the pandemic acting as a catalyst for change for many. So with that in mind, today's webinar will question what we've learned about learning during the pandemic and how our approach to design needs to change. So to help us reflect on those questions, we're really fortunate to have Nick Shackleton-Jones today. So over to you, Nick.
Hi, thanks very much, Matt. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And I mean that sincerely because I love talking about learning. I'm passionate about learning. And I know that many of you are as well, because that's what you do. That's what you've chosen to do. And that's what makes us a community. So thanks for kind of showing up, and please challenge me and kind of, as Matt says, pop questions into the chat. I'm going to go pretty fast because, I know that you're kind of across many of these issues, want to get to the interesting stuff as well and give you a chance to have a conversation. I'm going to come straight to the point in terms of answering the question, learning design in the new normal. The thing that we've learned from COVID is that if your premise for getting people together in a room is you're going to show them a PowerPoint presentation, that has got to stop. And that has a profound impact on what we do. Imagine that put yourself in the shoes of a CFO, and they're looking at the case for flying 24 people together as a kind of to a hotel or something, so that they can kind of sit together and look at a PowerPoint presentation. They are going to be saying, didn't we learn that we could do that via Zoom? And that's a problem which is common to kind of lots of kind of meetings, lots of organizations struggling to understand what they're going to do when they get together. And the beauty of that is it's going to prompt us to think more deeply about experiences. And in our context, it means we're going to have to shift from doing education, showing people PowerPoint presentations, to learning, experience design. I'm going to show you a little bit more about what that means. As Matt says, I'm currently sort of Chief Learning Officer at Deloitte in the UK, and I published a book, How People Learn, a little while ago. So many of the kind of the principles and things that I'm going to be discussing are there as well. But let's get to the interesting bit. I actually started my career as a psychology lecturer. And one of the things I learned by doing education is that the first thing I learned was that people forget almost everything. So if I say 100 things today and a year from now somebody tests you on those, probably your answer would be Nick who? No, I don't remember any of it. Don't worry, there's not going to be a test. But mostly I learned that my students were writing things down not to help them remember, but to help them forget, so that they could do their revision just before the exam. The other thing I learned, which was really fascinating, and I learned this more on the speaking circuit, was that I would give a kind of a set piece, a standard presentation, and afterwards people would come up to me and say, oh, that point was really interesting, or that point was really interesting. And sometimes they'd even remember things that I didn't think I'd even said. And what was really fascinating about that was I realized that everybody is taking different things from an experience. And the expression they most commonly used to describe this was resonance. They would say, that point resonated with me, or this point resonated with me. And I realized there was something really important going on here. And the essence of that is that if you've got two people sitting side by side on a train, and one is interested in architecture and the other is interested in plants and trees, they will remember different things because of what they care about. And this is really important to understand if you want to understand learning, is that people are not passive recipients of information. Education doesn't work for that reason. Actually, if you don't understand what matters to people, then you have no chance of designing learning. So I want to start by tasking you to type into chat, what would be your one word? What's the one word which, if somebody said, what's the most important thing for you to kind of give or receive in a relationship, or when you come to work, what's the most important word? What would it be? Just type that word into chat. So yeah, it could be anything at all. I'm going to have a quick look. Inspiration, caring, fantastic. Yeah. What else? Challenge, integrity, brilliant. You can, understanding, that's great. Understanding is also my word. Thanks, Amanda. Honesty, that's fantastic. Compassion, meaningful, empathy, curiosity. You know, it's really interesting because we are a diverse group. We care about different things, and we will, as a result, take away different things from this session, depending on what really matters to us. And so what does that mean for us? Well, something really odd has happened for our industry. Education and learning have become these two completely different things. Education has become this sort of rather tired ritual where we don't care about individuals and about users and what matters to them. We just kind of pull together the content, we put it all on slides, and you batter your way through the slides, and then maybe there's a test at the end, maybe there isn't. It's a sort of weird ritual, whereas learning is very much a natural process. We learn, rats learn, cats learn, dogs learn, and they learn as a result of their reactions to the world. Any of you who've got pets will understand that process. You don't sit them down, strap them into a desk and show them PowerPoint presentations. If you did, wouldn't have a lot of impact. Same is true of human beings. They learn as a result of observing things and their reactions to what happens to them, and so do we. And quite often our reaction is to what's going on around us in the world of work. We see things happen in meetings, or we get given challenges or tasks to do, and we learn as a result of those tasks, whereas in education, it's all topic-led. So the two things have become almost completely different. And the problem for us is that some of our stakeholders expect us to do education, where really we want to do learning. And in our businesses, they often stand in opposition. This is literally true, I know, because I do a lot of work designing induction programs. And what happens every time is there's a whole load of stuff that the organization wants us to put into the induction program. They want people to memorize, but if you actually talk to people, who've recently joined or new starts, what they really want to know is how to fit in, how to look cool, how to make friends, what to dress. This is why they're going to TikTok, because TikTok understands that intuitively. What people care about drives their learning. And so this results in this kind of curious dynamic. So one of the topics that comes up quite often is, should we have protected learning time? It's just a complete load of rubbish. Of course you shouldn't have protected learning. And the reason people say this is because when people are asked in the business why they're not completing more courses, they say, well, because we don't feel I have enough time. Look, people have always got time for learning. They're learning every day. They're learning in the flow of work. Work drives their learning. What they're saying is they don't have time for education, because education is irrelevant, because it's all the stuff that the organization is forcing at them, dumping on them. It's not the stuff that they want to learn. It's really important to understand that dynamic if you actually want to shift from education to learning. So how do you do that in practice? Well, it's quite straightforward. And a lot of my work is effectively training people to do this. You shift from the dynamic on the left, which is we need a course. Somebody comes to you and says, we need a course. You agree the content, you stick it in the e-learning, or you build it into the classroom lessons. You show people the PowerPoints, nothing happens, but you tick the box, deploy the course. Shift to we need an outcome. You stop your stakeholders and say, before you tell us to build a course, talk to us about the business outcomes that you actually want to see. We will then go and talk to the audience, understand what motivates them, what drives them, what their tasks are, what their concerns are. And we will build one of two things, either resources or experiences, and only those two things. Now, some of you may be skeptical about this. So I'd like to ask you a question. How would you do any of these things? How would you find your way in a strange city, help your daughter with her homework, find a restaurant in a new area, learn about a person you'll be meeting, choose a good movie? Just type into chat, how would you do these sorts of things? Choose a hotel for a holiday. We're going to see Google, yeah, it's Google, yeah. Ask others, yeah, that's a brilliant answer. Ask somebody you know, Google, ask somebody, yes. Recommendations, yeah. You might even just try it out in some cases. Use your phone, yeah, trial and error. YouTube is a great one. More obscure things like IMDb for movies and TripAdvisor, yeah, ask the Airbnb host, great. So I've asked this question literally hundreds of times. Nobody ever says classroom or e-learning. Isn't that funny? And that's because there's education, they're learning. So, the world has moved on. People like classroom because they like getting together. It's almost entirely ineffective, as I learned as a psychology lecturer, when you're actually sort of trying to change people. And e-learning is a lot cheaper. but it's sort of universally disliked. If you don't believe me, read Jane Hart's Learning in the Workplace survey. But all is not lost. We can do amazing things, both digitally and face-to-face. So we can design experiences that simulate real challenges. And we can offer resources, digital resources, that people pull at the point of need, that integrate learning and work as the kind of the big ambition is. Not because they're micro-learning, they're not micro-learning. That the map of the London Underground is not micro-learning. It's a resource. It's something you use to get the job done. And we can build those things and it have a dramatic impact on performance, as Atul Gawande showed in the Checklist Manifesto. So we can do those two things. We can create wonderful transformative experiences, which is what we should be doing when we get people together. And what we've learned through COVID is that we need to do that. If we're going to get together, we shouldn't be sitting in our office doing Zoom meetings and emails. We should be having significant, important, transformative experiences. Or we can design resources, stuff like Google and YouTube, which helps people to get the job done. Now, I want to illustrate this because sometimes I think people think it's semantics, that when I talk about experiences, it's just a kind of a fancy way of talking about classroom training. This is a real experience that I designed. It only lasts 60 seconds. I'm going to need a volunteer. It's an experience I designed for new analysts to a consulting business, to train them in the challenge of kind of standing up in front of clients, which they find quite stressful, talking about something that they may not know terribly well. And the way it works is somebody has to talk for 60 seconds on a topic that we choose some cards. So somebody needs to put their hand up and volunteer and be brave. And then Matt will do the magic. So who would like to be a consultant for 60 seconds? Yeah, you have somebody? Otherwise it may have to be Matt. Who's it? Anybody? Can you see anybody, Matt, who's prepared to be brave?
Or can anyone put their hand up? Or
oh, Julie, fantastic, Julie, congratulations.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Julie, I hope you have a microphone. I'm going to allow you to talk. This isn't someone we've already set up, unfortunately. So this is actually a real person. So here we go.
Hey, Julie, congratulations. Yeah. And if you could come off mute, fantastic. Hi, Julie. Thanks for volunteering.
No worries.
Here's how this works. 5 cards numbered 1 to 5. Pick a card, any card, a number.
2.
2, great. So I'm going to give you a topic to talk on for 60 seconds. Let's see how you do. So slide number 2, the topic is somewhere you should visit. So you've got 60 seconds, Julie, on somewhere you should visit starting now.
Okay. I think you should visit where I live, Youngstown, Ohio. I'll talk about what I know.
Great.
I live in Youngstown, Ohio. It's known as a Rust Belt city in this country because it was known for industry, particularly the steel industry. Currently, Youngstown is going through decline because in the 70s, all the steel mills closed and there was no longer work. So the population shrunk from 200,000 to 60,000, and it's struggling. But there's some, rejuvenation, and it's exciting. And it would be nice if people could live here because it's very affordable and it has some jewels and some special things about it. Is my 60 seconds up?
Yeah, well, 51, but that's good enough.
Okay,
so can we have a round of applause for Julie, if that's okay? Thank you very much. So I have a question for you immediately, Julie.
Yes.
Will you remember that experience?
Sure.
Yeah. Most people do. For most people, especially if you're in a kind of a live situation in front of an audience, it's quite anxiety provoking, and certainly new analysts find it pretty stressful. They learn from doing it, but they also learn from watching other people doing it, interestingly. And it's a really simple experience, but it's very different from what you might think of as kind of education. Thank you very much, Julie. Who's seen Dead Poets Society? You can put your hand up if you've seen. Yeah, thank you. A lot of you have seen Dead Poets with Robin Williams. Something really interesting about it. I was watching it back again, and I realized watching it that every single significant transformative moment in that movie is a piece of experience design. And it's very different from education. I'm just going to show you now, if that's okay. I just took a kind of quick clip, and you'll see what I mean.
I'd like you to step forward over here. Peruse some of the faces from the past. Come on, rip it out. Thank you, Mr. Dalton.
Let's go, gentlemen. I hereby reconvene the Dead Poets Society.
You have to look at it in another way, even though it may seem silly or wrong. Come on, Charlie, let it fill your soul. To indeed be a god!
And this image floats beside me.
Sweaty-toothed madman.
The sweaty-toothed madman with a stare that pounds my brain.
Oh, that's excellent. No grades at stake, gentlemen. Just take a stroll. There it is.
Now contrast that with education.
Agricolas. Agricolis. Again, please, agricola.
Your study of trigonometry requires absolute precision.
Thank you, Mr. Dalton.
And then look at this.
Just to illustrate the point.
What is this face at the window?
Swim against the stream.
That's the face of education looking skeptically at learning. I think it's fascinating, that dynamic, between the two, that everything that he does that's transformative is a piece of experience design. And this is the thrust of the shift. And if you read how people learn, the model that sits behind it, that explains why experiences and experience design is so important, is that we don't remember anything that happens to us. It's a radical idea, crazy idea perhaps. What we remember is our reactions. This is why memory is so unreliable. Many of you will read neuroscience and cognitive psychology and will know that memory is essentially reconstructed, but it begs the question, what are we reconstructing from? And I can answer that. We're reconstructing from our stored reactions. If we have no reaction to something, we literally don't remember it. We describe it as boring, and it disappears from our memory. We remember the things we react to. And we reconstruct experiences from that, which is why when we design experiences, it's critical that we build them around the reactions that people will have. But how do you know what people will react to if you haven't understood what matters to them? And this is where education goes wrong. Too often we're talking to people about stuff that doesn't matter to them, and they have no reaction, and they don't remember anything, and they don't change their behavior. So we're always in one of two conditions with learning. We're either pushing significance. So many of you will have worked on programs like I have around things like safety and diversity and kind of GDPR, for example, where people don't care. And we intuitively know that we have to get a reaction from them. We have to tell a story. We have to build a scenario. But there's also situations, the Google, the YouTube situation, where people care, where they're desperately trying to fix a problem, or they want to look cool, or they've just joined the organization and they need a checklist. And there we need no instructional design whatsoever. We just build resources that people can use. And we're always doing either experiences or resources. This has huge implications for our profession. There's a split in terms of our capability. We're either experience designing or we're performance consulting and actually building resources, or maybe both. But they're very different kinds of things to do than instructional design. It means that if we really want to shift away from education to learning in the kind of the new normal, we have to become user-centered. We have to understand what matters to our audience if we want to have an impact. And I've been using this process for a while. It means that we're stepping up in terms of learning design maturity. Many organizations still stuck buying, big libraries of content, trying to push them out, using badging to force feed people stuff that they're not really interested in, worrying about protected learning hours, because effectively they're trying to force education. They're trying to get people to consume stuff that's not relevant. And then sometimes they start to make the shift to performance consulting, and they refocus around, well, what are people actually trying to do? And maybe if we just built useful stuff for people, and that's a big step forwards. But ultimately that will leave organizations with a huge pile, a mountain of checklists and guides and resources, but wondering, how do we change things more fundamentally? How do we get people to grow? How do we develop people? How do we use events to transform people? And that's where you need to make the jump to kind of human-centered design. If you don't believe me, this is real data, from the initial kind of design work that we did for a leadership program. The reason I share this is look how different this is from topics. It's a leadership program, but we don't start with, the standard, leadership styles. We start with the problems and the concerns that people have, and we address those. We understand what their journey through leadership is, what the highs and lows are, what's holding them back. And we use then this CTR matrix, and we go line by line. And we say, well, look, if people are struggling with feeling lonely, which many of them do as new leaders, how do we address that? If people can't get emails on their mobile device, how do we address that? If people don't understand the jargon, how do we address that? a very different design process, but it results in user journeys, learning journeys, which are radically different to a conventional educational kind of event or experience. I want to finish with one example, and it's I hope a good example, because this is learning design in the new normal. When I joined Deloitte, we had to completely redesign the onboarding program. Bear in mind, we have about kind of 1,500, analysts joining sort of twice a year, and there was this. We were facing this awful possibility that we wouldn't be able to take people. They were doing 2 weeks in a hotel, and the horror was that we might end up just sort of battering them with end-to-end PowerPoints for 5 days. But we started with this premise that this is going to be learning, not education. There will be experience after experience. Even though it's digital, it will be one experience after another, and only experiences. We designed end-to-end experiential learning for 5 days worth of digital. And the results were fantastic. Not only did we win the award, we had a really positive impact on business, on utilization. The net promoter score for this was higher than it was for the face-to-face event, but we had to do things very differently. So for example, we used storyboards rather than lists of kind of topics that would be covered, because we wanted to get across this experience will happen and this experience will happen, and they'll be doing this together. And we built all the digital resources, mobile accessible, again, not modules, not e-learning, but useful stuff that they could access on their digital device. And I just want to show you how that looked, or some of that looked, from the analyst perspective.
Welcome to your Analyst Induction Program 2021. This will be an amazing opportunity to get you onboarded and excited about the incredible future that we have ahead for you inside Deloitte.
Get yourself into it, immerse yourself.
It doesn't really feel virtual, it feels really real to me, to be honest.
So remember to use the hashtag on any conceivable social channel. I hope you enjoyed the session yesterday.
I loved it. It was a lot of fun meeting everyone in my pod, especially.
I thought it was extremely valuable.
I thought it was really nice to meet people who I had things in common with.
See if you can try and give me a wee high five. Will it work? Will it work? So get on LinkedIn right now and announce the fact that you have joined Deloitte today. Classic, on mute, hilarious.
I cannot wait to welcome you to the consulting business post-induction.
Hundreds of you working together right here. I want all of you to come in and join me in the studio. Give us a wave, everyone. I can actually see you. Come on, don't be shy. Give us a wave. This is fantastic.
So as I say, we won this year's, super proud to have won this year's Gold Award for kind of learning technology onboarding program 2 weeks ago, actually. It really is design in the new normal, applying these principles to the design of digital experiences and resources that support people. So I'm going to sort of stop there. I hope I have provided a new perspective. There's tremendous opportunity for you if you're prepared to make the leap. And I guess I'll just finish by saying at the end of this year, I leave Deloitte to start my own thing, Shackleton Consulting. So if you need any help with doing that or leveling up, to coin a phrase, in the new year, please do let me know. And now I'd like to stop jabbering away and kind of open for questions.
Great, thanks, Nick. That was a great presentation. We've got lots of really positive feedback coming through on the chat. If anyone does have questions, please feel free to ask those now. Anna is asking a question. Could you give an example of one short learning experience, Nick?
Yeah, I've designed so many for different organizations. The longest ones have been an 8-week learning experience, believe it or not. One of the more conventional ones was the learning experience for leaders. This is an organization who were trying to get across the importance of giving people space to deliver, of being a supportive leader, not an authoritarian directive leader. And the problem was that they were trying to do that with education, sit people in the room, talk to them about leadership styles. It wasn't have the impact. So an experience we designed was we split leaders randomly into two groups, and we used an actor or two actors who they would then experience in these two leadership styles. You know, they would be either very directive on a task, you know, very parent-child, tell them exactly what to do, signing things off, micromanaging, or they would be a supportive, democratic coaching leader. And they would experience both styles. And then we would say, right, so how did that feel? What did that do for your engagement? What did it do for your performance? What were some of the issues? What did you feel? And all of the learning, they surface themselves because they've experienced it firsthand. So it's a lovely illustration, I think, of how powerful an experience can be, how powerful learning can be by contrast to education. More questions?
Great, thanks, Nick. That was, yeah, lots of questions coming in now. So Andrew's asking quite a good question that I think a lot of people on the webinar will be facing. So Andrew's saying, I work in compliance training. So how do I convince audit and regulators about your approach when all they really want me to do is tick the box? And I'm sure lots of people have that sort of feeling.
Well, you see, I've done a lot of my life has been spent in compliance. The BBC at BP, as you can imagine, now currently having exactly this debate within Deloitte, because we have lots of regulatory training. And look, I think sometimes we caricature regulators. You know, regulators are often more enlightened than we give them credit for. They're not interested in us just ticking the box. Who is interested in just ticking the box? You know, typically we're not interested in just ticking the box. Actually, regulators are interested in us making a difference. Now, there may be part of what we do where you know, we need to kind of show completion for kind of various modules, but I'm going to talk about two things which can make a really big difference. One is audience segmentation. So if you actually really understand, you know, different parts of your audience, which regulation applies to their role, they can even kind of self-select that by saying, well, I'm doing this task, this task, this task. Then we can make the regulatory training more relevant to them because we've actually understood the job that they're doing. And we did this in the BBC, you know, pushing out a lot of regulatory training. We built a little widget that said, are you doing this, this, and this? Are you working at heights? Are you working in a conflict zone? Are you working with children? And as a consequence, people only got relevant regulatory training. That was quite important. The other thing that you can do, and I was talking actually with Tony this morning about doing just this, is build performance support. Because get this, you join an organization, you do a 40-minute module on ethics, and that includes the gifts policy, right? You don't get offered a gift for another year. When you do, are you going to go back and look at that 40-minute module? No, you're not. What you need is a simple one-page guide, a flowchart that says, is it this, is it this, did it come from this sort of and that's the performance support you need. So actually, the regulatory modules, which you may well have to do, need to go hand in hand with resources that actually help people at the point of need. And we can really make a difference, you know, by actually building those resources. One last thing I will say about that is, and many of you will know this intuitively, sometimes you have to bring things to life. So it's not enough just to really communicate the policy. You have to tell a story. So for example, at the BBC, when we were doing regulatory training around data protection, we knew it wasn't going to be enough just to kind of push out the policy or the standard operating guidelines. We had to really bring it to life. And we know this intuitively. And it's because if people don't care about stuff like that, we have to make them care. And so often that's more effective. Storytelling and scenarios, you know, make more of an impact in that context than just kind of pushing out more information.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah. So I suppose you're sort of answering this question here by saying storytelling, but Melissa's asking, do you have any examples of designing learning experiences for practical courses?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the practical, I mean, leadership's pretty practical. I think what you sometimes people say, well, that all very well for soft skills, but actually a lot of the learning design I've done has been for technical things. So for example, at BP, it was kind of very complex turnarounds, asset economists, procurement. The way that you do that is typically there's a kind of a mountain of PowerPoints and information on a SharePoint, none of which people are actually using. So the very last thing that you should do is put those all into a course. I'll tell a story that illustrates the importance of shifting your perspective in a technical program sense. I was asked to do knowledge capture because we had a guy at BP called Hans, who was an expert in sand management, and he was going to leave the organization. And he'd been delivering these 8-hour lectures to people on sand management. And I think they thought we were going to go and film him and then put that 8-hour video somewhere where you could access it on a mobile device, let's say if you had 8 hours to spare. And of course, nobody would ever watch the video. So what we did instead was we shifted to a resource approach. The way to do that was simple. We took a list of the people who'd been on his program in the last 2 years, and we asked them, what top 10 questions would you have for Hans? What situations do you encounter? What problems do you have to tackle? And Hans had 5 minutes on each. And you see, we'd shifted from an 8-hour educational block, all the stuff, the content in Hans's head dumped on people, to a set of resources by actually putting the audience at the heart of the process. It works just as well when you're doing technical training. Do the audience analysis, understand the concerns and tasks that people have, whether that's in a kind of technical legal context or, you know, an engineering context, and actually address those directly with experiences. So BP, for example, use simulators and resources. So short videos, checklists, guides, and toolkits.
Thanks, Nick. A couple of questions coming in about budgets, and this question I was thinking as well before the webinar. Can you create a learning experience on a budget, or do you have to invest a lot of money to create a decent learning experience?
Well, I just did, didn't we? The 60-second consultant. Yes, I mean, it's obviously always nice to have budget. You can create learning experiences digitally, as we did with the analyst induction program, much cheaper than doing it face-to-face. I think if you get together, I think experience design is a different thing to do. It's a different discipline than just facilitation and instructional design. And so I think many organizations have the ambition to deliver experiences, but actually to do that, you need things like media skills. You need potentially somebody to be kind of filming something, media production, scripting. You might need actors. And so often, because we don't have those capabilities in-house, we have to hire them in. So it can be more expensive in some cases. But I think the most important thing, and many of us will know this, is that it would be great if leaders started thinking about setting people challenges. If they became, you know, if you like, experienced designers, if they were looking at their team and you know, setting them tasks to do or stretch assignments, you know, that's also experience design. So it's a kind of a broad spectrum, and it can range from the expensive to the integrated into the flow of work.
Nick, what are your thoughts on action learning as a sort of philosophy, or another way of perhaps coming at designing an experience that's active? And
yeah, well, it depends. It's used in different senses. So, for example, project-based learning is something I'm a big fan of, and have used on designed into many programs. Designed a leadership program where leaders came together for one day for a set of experiences, and then based on that, they had to choose missions, and that was an action learning philosophy in the sense that, you know, they would do the missions, they would come back on the second day and report back on the success of those. And broadly speaking, as a rule of thumb, if you look through a learning program and there are no challenges, there is no learning going on. Simple as that. If there's no challenge, there's no learning, because the challenges are driving people's learning. That's why we talk about learning on the job, because the job is driving the learning. So if we're not setting people challenges, but there's obviously another sense of action learning sets. I think, you know, that can be, you know, quite effective, because quite often what you're doing is grouping together people who face similar problems and have similar concerns, and so they will learn from each other. But as many of us will know, if we're not careful, those tend to kind of fizzle out. So we need to actually put a bit of effort into maintaining them. But the answer is yes, I'm a fan of it.
Great.
Sorry, before you go on, it just reminded me, Nick, of my own experience back in the university days. Even, you know, it was doing all the college work and university work, but there was a student-run initiative race, and it was national. And basically, you were set missions. You basically had 5 days to go around 3 cities and collect a whole bunch of do a bunch of stuff. And I did it for 3 years and won it twice with the team. And the thing that we learned from that experience was communication, collaboration, working in teams, solving problems. We learned so much inadvertently from all of that activity, which completely supplemented or even eclipsed some of the things I was learning on the university course itself. So I think you're absolutely right. You know, related to that is what presumably there's really strong value in linking team goals you know, and linking those back up to the organizational goals and structuring those as, you know, they're sort of mission-driven, goal-driven challenges. Would you see that as beneficial?
Love that. I think it's exactly right. I think that should be the role of leaders. I think we talk about leaders linking to the organizational kind of values and mission, and often they struggle to do that. And I think you're absolutely right. So, for example, if we want organizationally to be more innovative, or we want organizationally to move into a digital space, or we want organizationally to connect better with our customers, leaders should be setting challenges for their teams that help them to experience what that shift is all about. Because if they're not, if leaders are just saying, oh, go and do this program, you know, that the L&D team run, the chances are that's education, and it won't enable people to make that connection. So yes, I think that's a critical role of leadership, to frame challenges for people which connect them to the, you know, the bigger organizational mission. Yeah. Sorry, Matt, you had a question.
No, that's fine. Just the audience have lots of questions for you, Nick. And one of those is, you just showed the 5DI process.
Yeah.
But what should we do if you want to learn more about that? Lindsay's saying she's read your book, but she wants to get some more experience in actually doing the work, and wondered if there's any additional resources out there that she could access.
Yeah, yes, because I sort of, it's great. Thank you, Lindsay, for buying a book and reading it. I appreciate it. But not everybody wants to buy another learning book. I'm one of them. So there's actually, I've recorded a bunch of kind of videos for anybody who wants to kind of try before they buy on Shackleton Consulting as a whole. There's a 30-minute thing on the 5DI and how to apply it and how to use it. And there's some templates on there as well that are kind of free to use. And if you need any help, give me a shout. But you know, if you're fine to kind of experiment on your own, then there should be everything there that you need. So maybe, you know, have a look and give me some feedback.
Great. And another person's asking, project-based learning or action learning set sounds really interesting. Is that something that Total Engage could facilitate? And if
Question for you, Lars, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we had firmly in mind when we put that product together, and to bringing all of these key elements of engagement and performance management in its true sense, i.e. supporting structured conversations that are around improving performance in the role, and offering people developmental opportunities that are aligned to their needs, but also to the needs of the team and the organization around them. But you're absolutely right. You know, I think, you know, Total Engage with its workspaces and its ability to create and curate content, and to have structured conversations around that content, really helps push that type of agenda. And if you can think of those as goal-driven, you know, work groups or action groups or missions, even you can see them structured as challenges, as Nick is saying. Lots of flexibility there. And I think I made an earlier comment in the thread about you know, a lot of what we're talking about today is in our own control. It's in many respects as designers, and thinking around the content, or not just the content, obviously the experience itself, the technology through which it flows or which you access it is essential, but it's, you know, it needs to be harnessed in a way to deliver those experiences most effectively. So, you know, bringing all of those elements together is a big step in that right direction, rather than just focusing, say, on the completion of content and courses, as Nick is saying.
Okay, we're having lots of questions here, and I think maybe we'll move some of these into the community afterwards as well, if we do have too many today. But here's one that's sort of asking a really sort of practical one as well, that will hopefully draw in what we've been talking about today in a sort of rounded way, Nick. Russell's saying he's completely bought into a resources approach. Unfortunately, he's obtained the buy-in from his directors to stop educating. But his first group is next week with sales new starters from the last 3 months. So if you're doing an onboarding experience with some new starters like this, are there any thoughts or tips that we could get for the most, so that could help that group next week?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love talking about this. I'm just hesitating because I'm going to talk 40 minutes. But so first thing you need to do is actually talk to people in that group who were previously onboarded. So in the last kind of 6 months to a year. And actually, the simplest thing to do is to get them to do concerns and tasks like list. You run some focus groups with them, say, list your kind of top 10 concerns, top 10 tasks, and then that becomes the basis for you actually kind of building out your experience and resources. What resources should you build? Well, you can look down that list and you can pick them off. Typically, the number one resource to build is a checklist. And the reason for that is because people very rapidly lose confidence in a new role if they don't know what they're doing and they're afraid to ask other people. So a simple sort of checklist that says, you should do this, you should do this, really helps people, you know, to feel engaged. The other thing that actually helps more than anything else is a buddy. Time after time, this has come up in our research with users. That's an experience which, you know, is more important than an event or a website you can go to. Actually having somebody there to help. So buddying people up is the second thing I would say. And then last but not least, if you're going to get them together for an experience, focus that on their reactions on practical stuff and how they feel. So try and do two things. Try and celebrate the fact that they've joined, make them feel they've got a community, make them feel that they made the right decision, because that engagement is going to be really important in the months ahead, but also give them a chance to practice some of the critical things. So for example, if they're in sales, it might be a simple interaction with a client. Don't batter them with 101 kind of proposition PowerPoints. You know, maybe tell them flipped classroom model. In advance of the session, we're going to be running some, you know, practice sessions selling these products from a portfolio. Here's a PDF on each of them, and then let's kind of run that when we get together, and we can have a bit of a giggle. We can, you know, try it. It's safe to fail. We can watch each other doing it. We can learn from that experience. It's a lot of fun. You feel like you leave the event, you know, friends, having experienced something together. So as a kind of a thumbnail sketch, given that I don't really know anything about your organizational content, and I may be speaking out of turn, you know, those would be my kind of initial thoughts.
Thanks, Nick. That was really helpful. I'm sure there'll be lots of things to take away from that. Okay, I think we'll sort of close the conversation now, move this over to the community. Just one last question though, because it's a curious one. Are we really saying there's no place for education anymore, Nick?
Well, I'm inclined to go off on a whole, you know, tangent on this. No, there isn't. I can't wait for it to stop. It's a kind of a global network of torturing people. You know, why on earth we thought it was a good idea to tell people to sit down, shut up for 10 years at a stretch, just runs counter to everything that we know about learning, which is interactive, and it would be considered torture if we did it to kind of other animals. But we've grown used to the idea that we should do it to human beings, and it's becoming a real problem for us as business, because, you know, and as individuals, because people kind of hit midlife and they realize that they've been trained to spend their whole life caring about something else somebody else cares about, hit this deadline, do this thing, pass this test, and they don't really know who they are or what they want to do. So it's deeply problematic. I think that the other thing, because we're talking about, you know, the new normal for design, I think we realized through a kind of reductio ad absurdum how ridiculous the education system is, when effectively universities were having people come and sit in the university, locked in their halls of residence, watching lectures digitally, just to justify the enormous kind of, you know, fees. I mean, that reduces to the point where you just kind of send somebody a book and charge them £50,000 for it. It's incredible as a kind of a model. It only works because employers continue to hire on the basis of degree certificates. But if you track this debate, you'll know that that's very rapidly eroding, because the data says that those degree certificates are not a good predictor of performance in the majority of cases. In fact, around 75% of students don't even get jobs in related fields. So it's a house of cards is the answer. Sorry.
Okay, well, that's good. On that controversial note, Lars, would you like to say
well, just to say, Nick, you know, there's some systemic change required, right? And we're going through lots of uncertainty and change right now. So one can hope that we might actually start to tackle some of these things a bit more deeply.
Yeah.
Doesn't look like it, especially in education right now, but in most economies. But there is, I think, just generationally, this will sort of wash through, hopefully, eventually. And there's definitely a growing focus on the concept of skills and capability, as opposed to, you know, bits of paper that you may have had on not so related things. So that's definitely the right track to go in. I thank you very much, Nick. This has been fantastic. really good session. It looks like from all the comments so far that everyone's really enjoyed it. It's great to see. So thank you very much. Thanks, Matt, as well for being Master of Ceremonies. That's fantastic as well. And I just want to wish everyone an early festive greeting. Sort of getting into the spirit already, since the end of the year seems to be hurtling towards us. So let's hope 2022 is better than 2021 and 2020 in terms of our lived experience. So thanks again, Nick.
Thank you. Enjoyed it. Thanks, everybody. Bye for now.
Nick. Thanks, Lars. And also just to say, if you do wish to continue this debate, you can do so in the Totoro community, and the webinar will be available from tomorrow. So thanks very much.
Super.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye for now. Bye.